Well, today we're going to be talking about Socratic Method. Socrates is really the first person to do philosophy in a certain style in the West, at least as far as we know. Now, there were other philosophers before him, people known as pre-Socratic philosophers. One of the most famous, and perhaps the first in Greece, was Thales. He had the view that everything is water. Now, I'm not sure quite what prompted him to think this. Those of you from Houston might sense a certain affinity with this view at the moment. But his view was that really in the end, everything in the world is made of one particular kind of stuff. Now, he thought it was water, and the story goes that he was a well digger. And so I think there was some incentive for him to have this view. You sure, Thales, you can dig a well and get me water on my property? Sure. In the end, everything's water. Down deep, everything is really made of water. But now, did he have any arguments for this? Well, no. And a lot of the other pre-Socratic philosophers, some of whom are going to come up in this course, have similar sorts of views. They make pronouncements. We have fragments, but we don't see any arguments for those. Socrates is really the first person to adopt a method of questioning and a way of both producing and critiquing arguments. So if you put forward a view like everything is water, Socrates is immediately going to start raising questions and asking you things to try to get you to defend your claim. And as far as we know in Greece, he's really the first person to engage in something like this process. Now, a lot of times today, people refer to Socratic method as something slightly different. In law schools, for example, Socratic method just means the professor starts asking you questions at random, pointing to you or calling you out by name and saying, all right, what was the argument of the case of U.S. versus Caroline Products, 1938? Right, it's up here. But that's not what Socrates did, okay? Socrates instead was examining certain kinds of questions and had a method for doing it. Well, last time we talked about what philosophy is. It's the pursuit of good judgment. And what I want to do today is jump forward to the way in which Socrates thought it was appropriate to practice that pursuit of good judgment. How do you actually pursue good judgment? What does the quest for wisdom look like? Well, his answer was something like this. He said, first of all, it's important to defend your view. It's important to be able to not only advance a philosophical position, but advance an argument in favor of that view. So he really is the first person we find systematically engaging in philosophical argument. The second thing that's really clear about Socratic method is that he more or less does the questioning and lets other people put forward the positions and make the arguments. So for the most part, Socrates isn't saying, here's what I think is true, and giving you an argument in favor of that. Instead, he lets somebody else put forward a claim, and then he starts attacking them. So it's really a sort of negative argument he's especially interested in. As this says, he didn't write anything. He appears as a character in the dialogues of Plato. And in the early Platonic dialogues, we think we have a record of what Socratic dialogue was really like. Not in the sense, of course, that Plato was there taking notes and writing down every bit of a conversation, but instead reflecting the way that the actual Socrates operated and reflecting the views that he actually had. So what is this Socratic method? Well, I've said it's a method of argument, a method of questioning. Here's the general idea. Socrates will ask what something or other is, what justice is, or wisdom, or righteousness, or friendship, or love. And somebody gives an answer. And then he begins to analyze their answer. They give a definition. Virtue is this, justice is that, and so on. And Socrates says, well, let's examine that and find out whether that's right. So he starts asking a series of questions to see whether they've given a good definition. Now, the first question he really is concerned with is this definition clear? Do I know what you mean by the definition? And sometimes he will say the definition is unclear. Other times, he will say it's too narrow. That is to say, there are important cases that it's leaving out, things that it ought to be covering that it does not cover. And sometimes he will say the definition is too broad. There are really things that it's covering, that it's including, that shouldn't be there, that are not true cases of friendship, or love, or virtue, or justice, or whatever it is that we're in quest of a definition of. Well, at that point, typically in these early dialogues, someone proposes another definition. And then he repeats the process with that. And it's pretty typical in these dialogues that there are at least three of these definitions. We're going to look next time at one where there are 3 attempts at definition. In some of the other dialogues, it goes up to as many as 6 or 7 attempts. And then typically at the end, everybody says, well, I guess we don't know what blank is. We don't know what courage is, or justice is, or love is, or friendship is, and so on. And so we don't get, at the end, Socrates saying, haha, let me tell you what it really is. Instead, what we get are these questions, and we're left unclear. We're supposed to be thinking, okay, what do I mean by virtue, or goodness, or justice? And so the whole point is, in a sense, to get you engaged in a process of questioning, to get you involved in this process of thinking, what do I mean by, let's say, friendship? Do I have a clear idea in my head? Can I construct a definition that would withstand Socrates' method? Now, I'm going to apply this in a very simple way today to a concept that doesn't have much philosophical significance. We're going to see it again and again with things that do have real philosophical significance, with courage or virtue or self-control or justice or knowledge and so on. But I want to take something simple that we don't have strong feelings about. You may think that you have strong feelings about what's just and unjust, what's right and what's wrong and so on. Let's start with something where nobody's fighting in the streets over this, the question of what is a chair, right? Even in Berkeley, people do not start beating each other over the head over the definition of a chair. And in fact, typically people come in, and if I say, do you know what a chair is? They'll say, sure, right? If I say, do you know what justice is? You might think, ooh, I don't know. But if I say, do you know what a chair is? Everybody essentially says, sure, I know what a chair is. So let's think about what a chair is. Now, can you give a definition? Well, let's let the blue circle here, actually, it sort of looks like a circle. On this screen, it looks like an oval, but up there, it looks like a circle. Let's let that represent the set of chairs. Okay, so the blue shape here will be the set of things that really are chairs. We're going to try to craft a definition. And so the light green thing is really meant to be the things that are covered by our definition of a chair. Now, ideally, we want those two things to match exactly, right? We want the set of things we define to be chairs to be exactly the set of things that are really chairs. And so we want the things covered by our definition and the things that are actually chairs to match up precisely. That is to say, we want those two circles to overlap completely. We want our definition to pick out all and only chairs. We want something to pick it out if it's a chair and not pick it out if it's not a chair. All right, well, that's simple enough. But now the problem is that often that doesn't happen. People propose definitions, and when you start examining them closely, you realize that actually those two circles do not match. Sometimes it turns out that the definition covers too much. Other times, the definition doesn't cover enough. In fact, those two things can happen at the same time as those circles indicate. We can have the things that really are chairs in the blue circle. Some of those will be covered by the definition, but some won't be. We'll call those false negatives. Our definition will be saying those things aren't really chairs, when really they are. Okay? And then there will be things that the definition covers there in the green circle that are not really chairs. Those we might call false positives. And in a case like that, our definition actually fails in both ways at once. It's both too broad and it's too narrow. It has false positives and false negatives. If you want to think of an analogy here, think about a medical test that's supposed to test for some underlying condition. Often medical tests have false positives and false negatives. You might undergo this test, and it comes back and says, yes, you have a certain disease, but it's reporting that falsely. In fact, a lot of medical tests, actually, most of the time, they're getting it wrong. They're giving you a positive answer when really there isn't an underlying problem. And so there's a big problem of these false positives, but also there are cases that the test might miss, where you really do have the disease or the underlying condition, and the test doesn't indicate that, and that would be a case of the test giving you false negatives. And the same thing can happen with our philosophical definitions. So, let's take an example. What is a chair? Now here I'm really asking you. I am not just, waiting to give you my own definition. Instead, I really want to know, what is a chair? Yes?
Something designed to sit on.
Something designed to sit on. Okay, good. So here we've got a definition. A chair is something designed to sit on. Now, how good is that definition? Does it cover things that are not chairs? And are there chairs that are not covered by that definition? Yeah.
I want to ask a clarifying question. Are
Sure.
we including subsets of chairs like benches, stools, couches?
Oh, all right. Benches, stools, couches. Now, he says, are those to be considered as subsets of chairs? Do you think, yes, I have 3 chairs in my living room. 2 are kind of like this, and then 1 is a sofa. And I call it a chair. No, right? I mean, do you think that sofas, that couches, are chairs? No. Okay, so we wouldn't ordinarily consider those subsets. But now I think you're onto something really important. Is a sofa or a couch something that is designed to sit on? Yes, but it's not a chair. So, our definition covers something that is not actually a chair. That tells us we have a false positive, right? That indicates that that green circle extends beyond the blue one. There are things in the green circle that aren't in the blue one, because a couch, a sofa, a bench is something that is designed to be sat upon, but it isn't a chair. Can you think of other things that are designed for you to sit on, but are not chairs? Yeah? Toilets. Toilet is designed for you to sit on, but it's not a chair. I've heard people who are old refer to it as a throne. Sort of a disturbing image. Like, what do you think kings and queens do? But anyway, a toilet is designed to be sat upon. But I said sat upon, but it is not. But it's not a chair. Any other things that are like that? False positives, things that are meant for you to sit on, but are not chairs. Yeah.
A saddle on a horse.
Good, you're supposed to sit on a saddle, on a horse, but is a saddle a chair? No. Okay, excellent. So those are examples of things that are designed to be sat upon, but are not chairs. Now, are there things that are chairs that are not actually designed for you to sit on?
A rocker, maybe a rocker, something like that.
A rocker?
Something you could sit on, but it wasn't designed specifically for you to sit on.
Ooh, something you could sit on, but isn't designed for you to sit on. So what would be an example of a sort of thing like that? It's a chair, I guess you could sit on it, but it's not really meant for you to sit on. Yeah?
People like to sit on desks.
Ooh, all right, there are people who like to sit on desks. Or these chairs, or these tables at the front of classrooms, they often try to make them sturdy enough so that professors who want to can sit on them. This one does seem sturdy. I could probably do that. In fact, I guess I'm going to do that. Just to show that I can do it, see? On the other hand, you got to be careful. The classroom I was in last fall, if I would have tried to do this, it would have fallen apart. So, but yeah, some tables are designed so you can sit on them. Can you think of other things that are chairs but aren't designed to be sat on? Yeah?
Ornamental chairs for decorations.
Oh, ornamental chairs for decoration. Yeah, maybe somebody crafts, right? And it might be a beautiful instance of craftsmanship. They put together this carefully designed chair, but it's actually very fragile. You're supposed to sit in the corner and admire it. You're not supposed to sit on it. And if it was in a museum, they'd have ropes around it saying, "Do not sit on the chair." Yeah.
Like stair steps.
Stair steps. Well, but they're not chairs, right? You wouldn't say, there's a fellow who's sitting on a chair. And so I think that would be a case of something that you might design it so that you can sit on it, but on the other hand, it's not a chair. So actually that would be a case of a false positive instead of a false negative for the definition. But it would still show there's some kind of problem. Yeah?
It's a chair that's part of like a statue or something that you're just meant to look at and not actually sit on.
Good, a chair that's part of a statue, right? Think of one of the monuments in Washington, D.C. You walk in, and there is, let's say, Abraham Lincoln sitting in a chair. Do you think, I'm supposed to sit in that chair too? And you scramble up and sit beside Lincoln. No, right? It's part of a monument. It's not something that is designed for anyone to sit on. In fact, it's designed for it's part of a statue, right? And the rest of the statue is sitting on. Yeah?
Prop chairs, like maybe in movies or in theaters.
All right, good. There might be a prop chair in a movie, kind of like the knives that, they stab people with in the movies and the blade retracts so nobody actually gets hurt. Maybe they're chairs that nobody's supposed to sit in, right? It's kind of like they want to build a movie set of a classroom like this, and it's expensive to do that, and so actually most of those things that look like chairs they're chairs, quote unquote, but on the other hand, if you sat in them, they would just fall apart. Or now you raise something else interesting. What about seats in a theater? Take a look at what you're sitting in right now. There are a few independent chairs, but most of these are seats in long rows. Are you sitting in a chair right now? How many of you would say, yes, I'm sitting in a chair right now? How many of you would say, no, I'm sitting in a seat, not a chair? Oh, only one? Really, usually it's kind of half and half, with a majority, well, half and half among those who raise their hands. The average class, most people are just like, well, I don't know now. Gee, I walked in knowing what a chair was. Now I have no idea whether I'm even sitting in one. But you all are bold. Hardly anybody would afraid for. You've got opinions, so that's good. Okay, so Socrates would say, fine to have opinions, but be willing to back them up. Now, it might be unclear whether to call this sort of thing a chair or not. You might say, yes, it's a chair. After all, it's designed for someone to sit in. But you might also start to worry about that. So now, this gives us reason to think this definition, a chair is something designed for a person to sit in, is not the full story, at least, about what chairs are. So can we do better? Does anyone have an alternative definition? Yeah?
Something designed with the intent of being a chair. Something designed.
Something designed with the intent of being a chair. Well, that's very close to saying a chair is what I call a chair. A chair is anything I mean to be a chair. So you might say, yeah, excuse me, I've got to put the chair back on the camera. So that's not a chair. You can't sit on that. Well, I guess you could, but but I would say, well, I meant it to be a chair, right? I'm talking about chairs. I mean this to be a chair. That seems weird, right? So it would be very odd to say, aha, a chair is what I mean to be a chair. Or you could say, I've got the ideal definition. A chair is a chair. Now, you can't argue against that, but it's also really uninformative. So I think part of what your definition points out is that some definitions actually have this problem, that they don't really end up telling you what you want to know. Typically, when you propose a definition, you want something that is explaining the meaning of a term in other terms. The idea is, all right, maybe we don't understand what a chair is, or maybe there's some dispute about it or something, but let's talk about it in terms that we do understand. And if I say a chair is a chair, or a chair is what I mean to be a chair, or is a chair is what we call chair, then I'm in a sense just defining something in terms of itself. I'm not really giving you any additional information. So we're at least flirting with circularity in your definition if we're not outrightly circular. Now there are, in computer science and mathematics, some definitions that look a little bit circular, but nevertheless are not really circular. In some forms, those are called impredicative definitions. So there can be things that look kind of circular that are not completely circular. And it's tricky. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that. When you build the real line out of the natural numbers and try to define what real numbers are, you tend to use a definition that, from certain points of view, can look circular. And there's a special name for those that look circular. Most mathematicians think they're okay. Some don't, because of this problem with circularity. How about another definition of chair? Yeah?
Something that is designed to be sat on and can indeed be sat on by an individual?
Something designed to be sat on and that can be sat on.
For instance.
Yeah?
A specific, sorry, I forgot the sentence, but it's like something designed for a specifically to be sat upon by an individual. Specifically to be sat upon by an individual.
Oh, okay.
So like
said,
that
yeah.
excludes a couch because you can have multiple people sitting on it, but a chair is usually made for an individual.
Ooh, all right. Okay, so she is refining his definition. She is saying, yes, it's not just something designed to be sat on by someone and that can actually be sat on. It's got to be something, first of all, specifically designed for that purpose. In other words, that's not just one of many things you could use it for. And secondly, that it's one person's, right? How do you get rid of couches? Well, you say a couch is not designed for just one person to sit on. It's designed so that multiple people can sit on it. So let's think about something that is designed for one and only one person to sit on. Well, how about that as a definition of chair? It's specifically designed for that. It's not like a table that, oh yeah, we designed it so that you can sit on it if you really want to. Tables aren't primarily designed for sitting on, right? So the idea would be it's primarily designed for one and only one person to sit on. And they can actually do it. It's not just a movie prop and so on. How's that as a definition? Yeah.
It covers like individual like recliners or sofas that are meant for one person, but we don't traditionally call them chairs.
Ah, okay, let's think about, yeah, first of all, a recliner. That's one example he's given. Suppose you have a recliner. Is a recliner a chair?
I'd say it falls under the beer.
Okay, so how many of you would call recliners chairs? All right, good. So most people would. That's an argument that actually that's not a counterexample. But now, what about other things that are designed for one person to sit on, but actually we wouldn't call chairs? There's something else. You came very close there. Yeah?
Stools.
Ah, what about a stool? A stool is designed for one person to sit on, and you can actually sit on it. On the other hand, is a stool a chair?
It's a variation of it.
She says it's a variation of it. Ah, okay, good. There is no position that you cannot defend if you're intent enough on defending it. Philosophers call this biting the bullet. Aha, we have a counterexample. A stool is not a chair. You can say, yes, it is. Okay, and that's her claim. Yes, it is. It's a chair. It's just a funny kind of chair. But most of us, I think, would say, stool isn't really a chair. Now, some stools might be. Actually, you might think, I don't know what to say about some things. Like, what about a bar stool that's unusually high but does have a back? Is that a chair? Now, what about a stool that doesn't have a back? Oh, no, most people are saying. So maybe we need to add it has a back to allow for the sort of bar stool that has a back to count as a chair, but not the one that doesn't. Yeah.
I wouldn't call a car seat a chair. That can hold one person that has a back.
Oh, what about a car seat for a baby? Right? That's designed for one person to sit in, and they can actually sit in it. But on the other hand, we don't normally refer to car seats as chairs. Gee, can you fit a chair in that car? Oh, sure, look at the car seat. It's like, no, that's not what I'm asking at all. Yeah.
What do you think about like Google's AI being able to identify things like that?
Oh, all right, yes. Now, here's one way in which this might actually matter. What do philosophy PhDs do? Most of them go on to teach philosophy. Or at least that's what used to happen before the job market got terrible for philosophers. But now, quite a few of our own graduates have become what is known as an ontological engineer. What is an ontological engineer? Well, somebody who thinks about questions like, what is a chair? What is a bed? I've met someone recently who has that job, who is working on medical terminology. What is a disease? What is a symptom? What is a condition? How do we characterize these things? How can we build a medical database for use in artificial intelligence that includes all of that? Those are actually subtle questions in artificial intelligence. And if you're trying to actually get a computer to understand and make inferences about chairs or medical symptoms or underlying conditions and so on, you need to be clear about these. Now, there are essentially two ways of going about doing that. One is to try to come up with a definition and code it into your program. And that's typically what an ontological engineer does. Another way to do it is to just sort of have a large database of information about these things and start feeding that into a connectionist network and get it to try to learn kind of inductively what these things are. And then if you do that, often you look at the program and you have no idea what it's doing or what features it's identifying. So there are those two approaches. And Socrates' approach is very much the sort of old-fashioned AI approach. We need a definition. And lots of people still do that in artificial intelligence and think about these problems that way. In that respect, even if in most philosophy classes you don't care what a chair is, if you're designing an artificial intelligence system that can use natural language, you need it to know what a chair is, and what a table is, and what a bed is, and what a dresser is, and so on. And all of those things are going to make a difference, and you will need something like a definition for this. Okay, back to our question about how to define chair. What happens if you look up chair in a dictionary? Well, here's one thing that you might get. It's a kind of furniture. Now, Socrates would hate that, of course. It's not that it's false, it's just what kind of furniture is it? That's really unclear. So, if you actually look it up in a standard dictionary, you find something like this. Aha, it's a piece of furniture with 4 legs and a back. Now notice, we're not talking about why it was designed here or its purpose. We're not talking about what can be done with it. We're just saying it has 4 legs and a back. And so that's a really different approach. This dictionary approach is purely about its shape, not about its purpose. And in fact, we're going to be on the lookout as we go through this course for things like that. Often people are going to have a purely external way of looking at these, like, hey, it has 4 legs and a back, and it's furniture. Often people will have a more internal, purpose-driven account, like, hey, it's for sitting. And most of the time we're going to find, actually, you sort of need elements of both of these approaches. But suppose we went to the opposite extreme from this purpose approach and said, let's think about just 4 legs and a back. Okay? How does that do as a definition? Are there things that have 4 legs and a back that are not chairs?
Animals.
Ah, yes! Animals have 4 legs and a back. My cats have 4 legs and a back, and they're not chairs, right? So,
It's not a piece of furniture.
and it's not a piece of furniture. Well, that's true. A cat isn't a piece of furniture.
What if it's a stuffed animal?
What if it,
Like taxidermy.
Oh, what if it's a stuffed cat? Okay? You might think it's a piece of furniture. Hey, I love this. Oh, that would be really disturbing. I'm one of those people who, at the vet, they had to actually start things over because it turned out for any client at the vet clinic, they had a limit of 60 animals. And I hit my limit about 10 years ago. It's not that I have them all at once. I mean, some of you are looking at me like, oh my God, you're insane. But no, I do a lot of animal rescuing. And so there are a lot of these animals that I've rescued and then placed somewhere. But I take them to the vet. And so there are lots of temporary visitors to my house as well as some permanent residents. I'm talking about cats. It's sometimes been true of humans, but I try to avoid getting multiple ones. Anyway, let me get back to the point of the issue. Yeah, I mean, is a stuffed cat a piece of furniture? Probably not. Certainly a live cat is not a piece of furniture. But think along the same lines. Yeah. Ooh, a bed might have 4 legs, and it might have a back, right? But would we say the bed is a chair? No. Other examples,
You
yeah.
could say in order to exclude bed, you could say that it has to be designed solely to sit on.
Ah, okay. He's saying, look, if we combine these approaches and we say 4 legs and a back and designed for you to sit on, then we can get rid of beds. Although you can sit on a bed, right? But go back to her point. You're not primarily sitting in the bed. That's not what it's primarily designed for. Yes?
A couch would fit that definition also.
Good. A couch could have 4 legs and a back, and it's designed to be sat upon. But it's, again, got more than one person. So we need to have that in there. Yes?
Even if we combine them, it doesn't work. Like rolling chairs, like the one behind you, don't have 4 legs.
Oh, right. Look at this chair. Okay, some of you might not be able to see it, but let me lift it up. It does not have 4 legs. In fact, I don't know, are those things legs? If they are, it has 5 of them. But I don't even know if, ooh, what is a leg? Yes, so we can, by the way, we're going to have, there is a Renaissance philosopher whose name was Sanchez, who was that sort of skeptic. You think you can tell me what a chair is? Well, whatever your definition is, it's going to refer to other terms. I can always say, so what are those things? Ah, it has 4 legs and a back. What's a back? What's a leg? And then you give me a definition of those. Well, what are those things? And so on. And he thought that meant you can never define anything, so you can never know what anything is. But anyway, I think you're right. There are problems even if we start combining things. So, here is an example of something you might worry about. That's actually got 4 legs and a back. It is designed, actually, in this case, for one person to sit on. But is that a chair?
It's a chase.
It's a chase or a divan or something. I mean, it's sort of an old-fashioned piece of furniture, and we have old-fashioned words for it. Most of us wouldn't call that a chair. Well, there's, of course, the couch, 4 legs and a back, but it is designed for more than one person. Ah, how about that? A bench. It's got 4 legs and a back. Now, that one's big enough that more than one person can sit on it, so we could say, look, it's got to be for one person. But actually, suppose we made it a small bench. Would it then be a chair?
Yeah, I think a bench is just a long chair.
A bench might just be a long chair, okay, yeah. Yeah, if you think of that as being small enough, mentally cut that off so that it's designed for one person, then it does kind of look like a chair, right? So maybe we can fix that by saying, look, it's really for just one person to sit on. But now we can also, well, we mentioned the bar stools, right? Is that a chair?
I mean, if that was sitting there and I told someone, hey, can you grab me that chair? I feel like they'd grab me that chair. They wouldn't be like, no, that's a bar stool.
Oh, all right, great point. She's saying, look, if that were in the room and I said, bring me that chair, what kind of person would say, that's not a chair, it's a stool? I mean, someone could say that, but you'd think, wow, that's really being nitpicky. I mean, that seems very uncooperative. Now, we got to be careful about that kind of evidence, because that might be evidence that it's a chair, but it might also be evidence that in ordinary speech we're charitable to one another, and we overlook things that are minor variations from absolutely correct usage. And so somebody says, I could care less. And I don't stop and say, wait, you really mean you couldn't care less? Because if you could care less, that means now you care more than that. So you're really saying you care. And it's kind of like, technically all that's correct. But people have started through, I don't know, sheer insanity, dropping the not from that phrase. And what they mean is sort of tolerated. Similarly, if somebody says, oh man, I'm starving, you don't look at them and say, no, you're not. I saw you had breakfast. Or somebody says, oh gosh, did you see the number of questions? I mean, there were 1 million of them. You think, no, there were only about 327. We understand some of those things and we're charitable. So we have to be careful about that sort of thing, because it might mean it's a chair, or it might just mean it's close enough to be a chair that we charitably allow, no pun intended, allow them to get away with it. Yeah.
But isn't it a variation of a chair? And so since it's like a sub-version of a chair, it's still technically fitting under that definition of a chair because of...
Okay, yes. I mean, it might be that certain kinds of things...
That's why it has that's why it has a different name, but it's still like using sort of that purpose of seating a person.
Yes.
So we're looking at the purpose as well, not just the actual hard name, because my name is Sahar, but that doesn't mean that like I'm a creature Sahar. That means I'm a human being regardless, but they just named me Sahar.
Okay, yeah, that's a very interesting sort of example. We might put it this way. Certain kinds of things, certain subkinds, are really so common that they have a special name, and we always refer to them by that name, right? For example, you are human beings. And if I walked in here and said, whoa, there are a lot of animals in this room. I'm not wrong, a human being is an animal, but nevertheless, that would be a very strange thing to say, right? Somebody says, how many animals do you have? And I say, oh, well, I have this many cats, and I have this dog, and I have a wife, and I have these children. Right? You think, oh, come on. I mean, people are special, and so even though it's technically correct that, yes, these people are animals, we ordinarily wouldn't refer to them that way, and maybe stools are like that. They're special, and we normally refer to them as stools, not just as chairs, but that doesn't mean they aren't chairs. So we've got to be careful in that direction too. There can be certain subkinds that we're so used to picking out by the name of that subkind that we don't think about using the more general term, even though it does apply. Yeah.
Defending that, if you ask someone to bring you, say, that bar stool or whatever, if you refer to it as a chair and the other person acknowledges that as a chair, in that moment, it is a chair, regardless of any external definitions. Like, in reality, it's just a bunch of matter. The only thing that matters is that the definition of chair. I mean, that's all that matters, is if we know it as a chair and we can refer to it as a chair, it's a chair.
All right, that's very interesting. He's saying, look, if we know it as a chair, we refer to it as a chair, I say it's a chair, you let me get away with saying it's a chair, then it's a chair. There's nothing else to being a chair, except we all call it a chair. This is one of the questions we're going to be facing throughout the course. There are going to be some philosophers who say, that's absolutely right. What is it to be a chair? It's just to be something we all agree to call a chair. And there's nothing else to it than that. There is no underlying essence of being a chair. There's really just whatever we choose to apply the term to. That's it. Other philosophers are not going to say that. they're going to say, no, there is something like a real essence of a kind. Maybe not with chair, because after all, that is something that's socially constructed. But with things like electron, they might say, look, being an electron is not just being something we all agree to call an electron. There really is such a thing. Now, other philosophers will disagree. So that's one of the issues we're going to be talking about throughout this course. It's kind of a big issue. There's an old story about Abraham Lincoln that I think brings out this contrast nicely. Lincoln is said to have asked one of his cabinet members, suppose you were to call the tail of a dog a leg, then how many legs would a dog have?
What do you call the other legs?
We still call them legs. Well, anyway, Lincoln's answer was 4. Calling a tail a leg doesn't make it one. Now, other people would say, well, actually, the answer is 5, because calling a tail a leg does make it one. And so that brings out this philosophical contrast rather nicely. If we all just start calling tails legs, then are tails legs? Lincoln's answer is no, but other people would answer yes. And we're going to see that contrast between, broadly speaking, realists and idealists all the way through the course. Yes?
Is that kind of like the Humpty Dumpty thing in the Looking Glass when like Humpty's like talking about like when I use a word like it's what I say?
It is, exactly. Humpty Dumpty says, look, when I use a word, it just means exactly what I want it to mean, nothing more, nothing less. And Humpty is basically an idealist who's having that view. Actually, he's doing it in a very personal way. What the word means is just how I use it. If I call it a chair, it's a chair. If I say it's just, and so on. I take it, his view, and a more common idealist view, is if we all agree to do that, then it really is that. So as long as we all agree to be Humpty Dumptys and say, yes, we'll use it that way, then that's the way to use it. But that's not the only way to look at language. Yeah?
So in philosophy, where is the line that we should consider in languages for informal terms and formal terms? Like when you said, for example, how we could all just be called animals instead of humans.
All right, good question. His question is about the difference between the formal and the informal in language. Because when you start examining how people actually speak, you find out that they're doing lots of things that don't exactly fit the literal meanings of words. For example, a light that light. When I have a light went out of the classroom, what happened? Well, that happened. Anyway, but notice, if I just said, whoa, it got dark in here, is that right? You might say, well, really, it made a very minor difference in the amount of light in the room. So did it suddenly get dark in here? Well, it got darker. So I think you're right to say, look, there's a difference between, as it were, the formal rules we would write down for our language, and the formal rules that grammarians do write down in books of English grammar, or that lexicographers write down in dictionaries, and then the way people actually use terms in speech. And that's one of the things that is a variation. And when we talk about chairs, actually part of the reason I picked chair is that it's not like it's really a common slang term for anything. I was, for 10 years, the chair of the philosophy department, but it didn't mean I suddenly had 4 legs for 10 years. And I wasn't designed to be sat upon, though sometimes it felt that way. But it was something that, if you stop and think about what was going on there, it was a sort of metaphorical use of language, and we do that kind of thing all the time. So we've got to be careful about that sort of thing, because you're absolutely right. There are lots of informal uses of language that go along with it. Chair, at least, doesn't have too many of those, so I'm hoping to sort of push those aside as we try to define it. But with a lot of terms, that's going to be critical. We have to say, oh, do you know that? Knowledge is one where it feels like, maybe that's something we just use very sloppily in ordinary speech. And so whether we're characterizing our sort of informal ideas about knowledge or something more formal will make a big difference. Well, let's take a look at some false negatives here. This is, again, for the definition, designed for one person to sit on 4 legs and a back. That doesn't have any legs, right? So that's sort of a problem, but it's a chair. What about that? It does have, well, I guess 1 leg, sort of.
A base.
That? Yeah, it has a base more than a leg. What about this one? What about that one? That? Does that have any legs at all? That thing. That has only 3 legs. What about that? That doesn't have a back. It doesn't really have legs. Well, as you can see, I really went to town finding these pictures of chairs. That's my favorite one. But now this is the real definition killer. A beanbag chair. Okay? It doesn't really have a back. It doesn't have any legs. It doesn't really have any definable shape particularly. It's really designed for one person to sit on it, though probably more than one can sit on it. Anyway, it gets tough. So, we could just go back to the hay. It's designed for one person to sit upon, but then we do have other problems. You might think, look, as soon as we entered these external things, 4 legs, back, etc., we were in trouble. But look, getting rid of them doesn't really help. There we have 4 legs and a back, and it is a chair, but it's not designed for one person to sit on. What about that? The mega beach chair. Or that, at the opening of a museum. Actually, my first thought about that was that that was a tooth, but it's a chair. Anyway, I think it's a chair. Anyway, what about that? Well, that's a stool, right? Not a chair, but it is designed for one person to be sat upon, another stool, etc. So, you might think, wait a minute. All right, so here's what happens in the Socratic dialogues. You walk in thinking you know what a chair is, or what a leg is, or what right and wrong are, or what courage is, or what friendship is. And Socrates starts asking you questions. You think, oh, that's easy. You give a definition, and Socrates tears it apart. Maybe you start with something kind of external, like the 4 legs and a back. And then you find out, oh, no, I have to bring in design or intent or purpose. Maybe you start with purpose, and you think, well, wait a minute, now that's too broad, I need to bring in something else. Whatever happens, you find that there are some false positives and false negatives. Things look too broad and too narrow. And so what do? Well, people try to revise this, and then they revise that definition, and so on. And so, what is Socrates really doing here? Well, you might think by the end, shoot, great. What did I learn today in philosophy class? I learned something negative. I walked in knowing what a chair was. Now I have no idea what a chair is. That seems bad. And indeed, that led to the accusation against Socrates that he wasn't teaching the youth of Athens, he was messing with them. They came to Socrates knowing lots of stuff, and by the end, they would say, gee, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And it seemed like he was hurting the youth. So he was accused of 2 crimes. One is undermining the belief in the Athenian gods. After all, they might come in thinking they believed in God or in the gods. And Socrates starts asking them questions, and this began to undermine their beliefs. And the second thing is of just corrupting the youth. Corrupting them how? Well, they go to Socrates knowing what right and wrong are. And then they emerge from Socrates' tutelage having no idea what right and wrong are. Their parents say, so, you wouldn't cheat, right? That's wrong. You say, well, define wrong. And your parents might think, oh dear, what are they teaching you in Athens? And that is exactly what was happening. People went to Socrates. They seemed to emerge in some cases more confused, and in some cases, worse people. Now, why worse? Well, because you might think, oh, look, in the end, nobody knows what a chair is, so you can call it anything you like. And that may not matter with chairs, but it matters with things like right and wrong, or just and unjust, where all of a sudden, people are saying, oh, all I've learned from Socrates is that nobody knows what any of this means, so you can just make it all up as you go along. And that's a very dangerous attitude. So it wasn't crazy for people to prosecute Socrates and try to get him out of Athens. In fact, they thought what was going to happen is that he would be found guilty and exiled. But it didn't really work out that way. His defense and his explanation of his method occurs in a dialogue that Plato wrote called the Apology. And here is what Socrates said in his own defense. I sought to persuade every one of you to look to himself, seek virtue and wisdom before he looks to his private interests, and look to the state before he looks to the interests of the state. And that should be the order he observes in all his actions. So he's really saying, think about what's right. Think about what virtue is. Think about what it is to be a good person, rather than just thinking what serves my interests, what's best for me. Think about what's best for all of us. Think about what would be right, as opposed to just what's best for yourself or even for all of us. Think about right and wrong, justice and injustice, wisdom and foolishness. Think about virtue. Well, now, he does make a strong assumption in this method. He thinks that in order to be virtuous, you have to know what virtue is. And in order to know what virtue is, you have to be able to say what it is. So, take chairs, for example. Well, to really know where to sit, you need to know what a chair is. And to know what a chair is, you have to be able to state it. Now, those are both very powerful assumptions. To know where to sit, do you have to know what a chair is? I don't know. And to know what a chair is, do you have to be able to say what it is? Do you have to be able to give a definition? Well, again, I'm not sure how to answer that question. But those are very powerful assumptions. And they're what lead to Socrates' idea that, hey, if we don't know what virtue is, for example, and in the sense of being able to define it, we don't really know it, and so actually we can't become virtuous. Now, the point is really to try to find all that out. Well, he was convicted of corrupting the youth of Athens and of undermining belief in the gods, and so he was given a choice. The prosecution demanded the death penalty, and people thought he would propose the alternative penalty of exile. He did not. In fact, what did he say? He said, look, Athens, I've been benefiting you by going around and asking these questions and trying to get you to think about wisdom and virtue. What should you do for somebody who's been benefiting you? I should get an award. I should get the prizes of the Olympic athletes. I should get to go up there and dine every day having a free lunch with all the Olympic winners. Well, people were so incensed at that they voted for the death penalty. In fact, lots of people who voted that he should be found innocent then voted that he should be put to death because they were so pissed off by that proposal. Well, in any event, yes, he demands a free lunch. Why? Because he says, other people, like the Olympic victors, only give you the appearance of happiness, but I give you the reality. The unexamined life is not worth living. I give you a life worth living, he says.